Doctors of Reddit, what is your how the hell are you even alive right now story? My friend's father is an orthopedic surgeon and he told us a story that once a boyfriend and girlfriend came in because they tried an in-home abortion by running her pelvis over with a car. Abortion worked, but I hope they actually never reproduce. Since you didn't specify how long they stayed alive, in med school I had a patient who got shot in the head a couple blocks away from the hospital. He was still able to talk for a few minutes after arrival, but it was clearly not a survivable injury. I stayed with him as his brain started to swell. I remember the moment his eyes became dull and his speech slurred to a stop. One time I had a patient who was walking in the street, got hit by a car, thrown into oncoming traffic, bounced off another car, and then got pinned under a third, or so the EMS report said. He had a dislocated shoulder and a non-displaced femur fracture. He was on sugar, which probably explained how he was able to scream at the trauma team to leave him alone. Edit. This happened a few months ago, not Joe Black. We have a homeless patient right now with active endocarditis, end-stage renal disease on dialysis, HIV, and a carcinoid tumor. Totally non-compliant with antibiotics even though he has a PICC line and shows up for dialysis once a week maximum. Never got chemo or surgery for the cancer. Constantly shows up to the ED looking for pain meds or in hypertensive emergency. After treatment he just walks out again. Gomers don't die. We have a patient we see at our hospital monthly. Young guy, early 20s, absolute turd to take care of. He has diabetes and essentially refuses to take his insulin. He comes in every time with diabetic ketoacidosis, which is essentially your body going into a coma-like state due to your blood pH becoming acidotic and very elevated sugars. The impressive part isn't that he survives this. Most people do. It's that this is a recurring event every month and each time someone manages to find him, get him to the hospital. If he was ever alone when this occurred and no one found him in a timely fashion, he'd be toast. Been seeing him regularly at the hospital for the last 18 months I've been here. When I was in trauma surgery in upstate by, got a notification about a man who was shot 3 times in the head. He comes in, literally one eye hanging out of the socket, blood everywhere, and he slumped forward. Apparently he was shot in the temple, exited out his right eye socket, in the nose exited from the roof of the mouth, and in the cheek one with exit from the side of the head. At this point I'm thinking they just brought him in so we can pronounce him in the ER because he looked dead. I go to examine him and tilt his head back, and he says "You be gentle." I jump back and scream like a little boy, as did everyone in the room. Literally the bullet missed his brain in every single shot. Anesthesiologist here. I once had a 20-something-year-old Jehovah's Witness as a patient who kept bleeding and bleeding after childbirth. Because of her religion she refused blood transfusions. After other measures failed, we finally took her to the operating room for an emergency hysterectomy that saved her life. In a pregnant woman, the normal hemoglobin, the protein in your blood that carries oxygen, count is between 9.5 to 15 GDL. When we took her to the OR, her hemoglobin was 3.1 GDL. In the ICU after, it was down to 2.6 GDL. I remember talking to her before going to the OR, and all she could do was lie flat in bed. She did so much as lift her head. Her heart rate would jump from about 130 to 180 and she started having chest pain. I also had to tell her A, that I didn't know if she would live through the surgery, and B, that I wasn't sure how much of an anesthetic I would be able to give her, so there was the possibility she might remember some of the procedure. Fortunately she did survive, and didn't have any recall. If she wasn't otherwise young and healthy, I'm sure she would have died. Edited a couple times for clarity. If these comments had been written by hand, we wouldn't have understood them. There was a guy who dead, was found by his roommate unconscious, had to be resuscitated, was barely responsive to painful stimuli, blood pH was 6.6. Now normal blood pH is between 7.35 to 7.5, and remember pH is a logarithmic scale. Typically 6.8 is not considered compatible with life. He ended up waking up and following commands for a bit. Just crazy. Not a doctor, but when I was 18, My mom was at a stoplight when she was rear-ended by a diesel truck going 60. Her back was broken and her brain was bleeding. At the hospital, her kidneys started to fail. She had internal bleeding, and her blood pressure was in the 20s. The doctor told us these facts and told us to say goodbye. A priest was there and offered her last rites. The next day she was stabilized, and I can remember the doctor looking at her like WTF. Paramedic here. I ran a call on a guy that was ejected out of a late 80s Mustang. The guy said the car rolled 2 times before pitching him out of the driver's side window. He said he landed on his head and the 7-inch scalp avulsion seemed to corroborate his story. The car was completely crushed and sitting on its top. The guy wanted to refuse treatment and transport. GCS 15 and never lost consciousness. I insisted though that he be seen at the ER. He rode the whole way texting people. When I told him that he shouldn't be alive, he said, yeah, I got a hard nugget. I work with a dude that has a family history of heart disease. Not many males in his immediate family branch reach past the age of 60. This man only has one vice: food. I've seen him in action. At one point his caloric intake was over 10,000 calories a day. It's almost obscene of how many burger meals and giant tubs of soda he puts away in a day. I don't know the count, but when he does need to see a doctor, they always marvel of how he is upright and not dead with his blood pressure so high. He's been told more than once that he should be dead. Edit. Even more surprising, he is not obese. He's pudgy and has that dad belly, but not enormous. He's certainly a wonder. Not a doctor. Friend who's a crime scene tech. They apparently tell this story to police now to remind them that unless somebody is 100% utterly dead, like head 20 meters from body, call the ambulance. Police rock up to an address of a couple of druggies. Enter and it's a mess. Mattress at the center of the living room floor and blood everywhere. Cannot reach the mattress without stepping in it. Spray on the walls and ceiling. 2 bodies on the mattress, both covered in blood. Cops have to go round and enter through the back door just to get near them without ducking up the scene. Cops check, but no signs of life. Call detectives who arrive and start investigating the scene. About 1 hour into it and one of the bodies takes a deep breath and starts to move. For some reason no one decides to shoot what was obviously a zombie. Turns out they got high and decided to end it all. Only one didn't succeed and just had a really strong nap. And that's why police in my state can't issue life extinct certificates unless they are looking at a more than 3-year-old skeleton. I am a doctor. My moment to shine. Patient was driving a motorbike. We were informed that dispatch had been sent to pick up a motorbike versus logging truck. Bike was behind the truck which had lost its load of logs at highway speeds. Trauma team is activated. We have called for blood. Guy walked out of the ER after period of observation. When he saw the logging truck lose its load, he simply let go of his bike and fell off the back, rolled a bit and got some bumps and bruises, but fine. Second case off the top of my head was a 92-year-old lady with urosepsis, bacterial infection in her blood from a urinary tract infection. Her initial gas had a pH of around 6.7 and a lactate of 12, too acidic and too high for the non-medical peeps. Young patients would have a hard time surviving that, let alone the very elderly. She was unconscious, but had received 1 dose of Cipro, an antibiotic, by mouth from her family doctor before becoming altered. Family agreed to a comfort, do not resuscitate, level of care and said their goodbyes. The next morning, the resident on call got pages asking if Mrs. Blah 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 could eat. She was awake and hungry. Guess the dose of Cipro kicked in. Veterinarian here. Here's a recent abdominal x-ray, see if you can spot a mass. Normal for comparison. Vet here. I had a patient come in recently with a PCV, packed cell volume. Basically how many red blood cells you have, of 12%. Super anemic. The normal range is about 35-55% and we tend to transfuse once it hits 20% as the animal should be struggling. Patient was walking around, wagging tail and everything, just a little pale. You can't kill cockroaches. A former attending. Trauma is a disease. Every trauma surgeon ever, the implication being people who do stupid it and get hurt, are going keep doing stupid it and getting hurt. And in my experience it is true, especially drunk drivers. Nice folks though, always have some terrible disease. If you want to live forever, just be a D. My dad had a massive heart attack a few years ago. He proceeded to drive around for several hours disoriented and confused to where the hospital was. He went to a closed fire station and drove around the city for who knows how long. He had a complete 100% blockage in his left anterior descending artery. They call it the Widowmaker. Blessed to still have my old man around, to say the least. Not a medical doctor, but I am almost 1/8 of my way through optometry school. I'm not a doctor, but I was EMS for a few years, and one day we came up on an accident on the highway involving a motorcyclist and a minivan. Usually that is not good at all. It's always a mess. We get there and find out he hit the minivan at 80 miles per hour while it was stopped on the side of the road and flew through the back window, through to the front, and survived without a scratch on him. No broken bone, no AMS, altered mental status, aka blunt head trauma. He even got himself out the van and asked if the people inside were okay. He was wearing a helmet, and I think that saved his life. Blew my ducking mind. Do I need to say not a doctor at this point? I feel like it's a given. When I was in 9th grade, a friend of mine got into a car wreck. It was a car full of teens in the middle of the day. There were no injuries, but one of the parents insisted that all of them go to the doctor and get x-rays. Mind you, these are lower class people in a podunk town in the podunk state of Kansas. So the fact that someone felt strongly about this and they all took it seriously is a miracle in itself. After hours of waiting around and taking turns, my friend goes in for her x-ray. When they look at the x-ray, they realize her neck is broken. It's called a hangman's break because that is how your neck breaks at the gallows. Her spine is entirely broken, just sitting on top of itself. All she had to do at any point was tilt her head up, sneeze, whatever, and she would have instantly died. It's just insane thinking about. They put her in a halo, think Gretchen Whiners, and she healed and was fine. Edit. Okay. Regina George. No idea so many people are so passionate about mean girls, but my bad. I did the medical rotation where my consultant was an endocrinologist. We had a young man with type 1 diabetes who would present almost weekly in diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA, actually a medical emergency as can cause coma and death, from not taking his insulin and just eating whatever he wanted. Always self-discharged once he felt better. In my last week of the rotation, he came in after overdosing on IV opioids, found by his family after no one having any contact for about 24 hours. His temperature was 24 degrees Celsius in the ambulance and the pH of his blood was 6.76. 7.35 to 7.45 is normal. Less than about 6.8 is not generally compatible with life. The paramedics, who all knew him, genuinely thought this was it for him, as did all the IQ. But as the old saying goes, you're not dead until you're warm and dead, in that at cold temperatures, your metabolic rate can be slowed to the point where it appears you're deceased. However, on warming, your body resumes more normal metabolic function. Warmed him up in the IQ, treated his DKA, and he survived. I rotated away to another hospital before he was discharged, but he was out of IQ when I left, awake and interactive. Edit. To Cleffy. 24 degrees Celsius. Normal is 37.5. I saw a guy who got shot 9 times, 3 of which were in the neck. Nothing important got hit, so we just cleaned out the wounds, packed and covered them, and that was it. I'm not a doctor, but this guy where I worked got stabbed through his stomach, cut his liver, crushed his lung by a water ski. After this, he swam all the way back to shore. Bit 7 times by a brown recluse spider when I was 5. Don't even have scars. Doctor said by the 3rd bite I should have been in convulsions. I just remember they itched a lot. My father-in-law went to the ER for some sort of pain and it was discovered that he had over 300 blood clots in his legs. Every single blood clot dissolved and he's alive and well. I've been struck by 3 cars. Worked in a coal mine until a shaft collapsed with my team in it. Worked making fireworks until a stray spark detonated the powder shack I was walking out of. I've fallen off of roofs, and was even a passenger in a Jeep that flipped. My only excuse is I'm too ugly to die lol. CVT here. I had a cat come in with severe renal failure. At least 95% of the kidneys were completely dead and blood was barely circulating through them. The blood toxicity levels were the highest I have ever seen while I've been in practice. It was amazing the cat could even stand on its own. It didn't make it very long, but I still found it amazing. I got sick when I was 19. Soon after I had returned from hiking the PCT. Sick enough to be hospitalized. Sick enough that all of my family flew out to talk to me. Sick enough that my doctor told me, "You're going to die soon. This is a reality. We do not know what is wrong with you. And if you live it will be under a power greater than me and my colleagues can muster." At this point he got super uneasy. "I'm keeping you in my prayers." So it was at that point, while enduring multiple organ failure, that I tried to make peace with my very small and short time on this earth. For a week I was as ill as anyone who was dying in the ICU with me. I spent 80ish of those hours in a coma and the rest in a partially waking resting state that was painful and awful. On the 8th day I could feed myself. Although it was difficult because during the previous 7.5 days my body destroyed about 30% of its muscle mass in chunks in various places. My right leg on my thigh, both of my biceps, my lumbar on the left side, the top of my abdominal muscles, and the muscles in my right hand. While I was making the attempt at feeding myself, the doctor poked his head in and said, "You might be getting better. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. How's the pain?" Well, the pain was bad, but I wanted to live. Within a week I was standing and 6 months later you wouldn't have known I was ever sick, except for a light limp that remains to this day many years later. The attending physician while I was in the hospital who said these things to me and talked to me saw in his office about 3 months into the recovery process. He said almost those exact words, "I do not know how you lived." The doctor then told me that he had told my family to make arrangements for my death right after that initial conversation and that when I had slipped into a coma he was pretty sure that was the end of it. That's my story of medical trauma. Edit. Apparently I didn't make it clear but they never figured out what made me sick. As a stopgap to secondary infections I was put on antibiotics and fluids, but they never found out. Not a doctor but I do medical research which includes chart abstractions. I was abstracting a chart on a 90-plus-year-old rancher in Montana, still an active dude without any major health issues. I was abstracting what lead up to his minor heart attack and couldn't hardly believe the ICD-9 code so I went into the more granular notes. A storm rolled in while he was checking on the cattle so he hopped on his four-wheeler to get home. Boom, he gets hit by lightning causing him to wreck his four-wheeler. He must have been okay because he gets up and starts hobbling home, only to step on a rattlesnake and get bitten. Shakes that off too and manages to get home only to have a heart attack while waiting for medical services to get to his rural home. This dude had ICD-9 codes for lightning strike, motor vehicle accident, snake bite, and heart attack all on the same day. Spent like 4 days in the hospital and went home seemingly no worse for wear. Damn, I hope I'm that resilient at 90. Edit, there are no HIPAA identifiers here. I just did my gazillionth HIPAA training last month. Even specifying from Montana is okay. You aren't supposed to disclose age for patients 89 plus but such ages and elements may be aggregated into a single category of age 90 or older. I'm not even sure the dude was over 90, I just remember he was old.